What if your deepest fear wasn't just in your head, but on the page? In this episode, MJ Mars takes us inside her chilling short story collection entitled We've Already Gone Too Far, blending psychological horror, urban legends, and real life anxiety. We talk haunted magicians, punk-fueled nightmares, gold rush terrors, and the fears that bind us all. So without further ado, I give you MJ Mars. All right, friends and familiars, we are live on YouTube, Twitch, Trovo, and Facebook with MJ Mars, here to discuss her recent short story collection entitled We've Already Gone Too Far. MJ, welcome to the show.
Hi, Vince. Nice to see you again.
Lovely to see you again. Thank you for joining me on this 13th day of March 2025. I really enjoyed your debut novel, The Suffering, so I was excited to read some of your short fiction. And one thing I truly appreciate about your writing is how you lull the reader into a false sense of security, guiding them through immersive comfort horror before shocking them with extreme violence that comes out of left field. So, as always, I really enjoyed it, and I appreciate you being on the show today.
Thank you so much. I'm really glad that you enjoyed the shorts. It was so nice to hear your thoughts on The Suffering last year when we chatted. So I'm excited to hear what you have to think about the shorts as well.
Absolutely. Well, let's launch right into it. So the stories in the book involved cryptids, monsters, aliens, ghosts, and psychological terror. What connects these stories thematically? Was there a specific idea or mood you wanted to convey across the collection?
Well, I think that the main thing in the collection with the characters is the idea of not all of us thinking in the same way. And I think when you're in a horror kind of setting, you can play with that a lot more because people are expected to act in a certain way in more normal circumstances, I would say. But I suppose when you've got a huge glittering monster, or a mimic pretending to be your son, or there's people vanishing from an aeroplane or whatever, there's no telling what you would kind of act like or what you'd be expected to act like. And so I enjoyed that a lot. I think the characters in this are all maybe a little bit different to like what people would assume to be normal ways of thinking and normal kind of everyday people. There's always like a little bit extra going on with them, and extra worries that they've got, or extra sort of personality traits. And it was just fun to throw them into these settings and see all of those neuroses and worries and and things come out. So yeah, I'd say it's probably a bit of an exploration of people acting a little bit different than you might expect, maybe.
Yeah, I noticed each story, if there was a classic trope involved, there was definitely a spin on it that made it unique, as well as the characters having this kind of, not necessarily bizarre, but definitely deep-seated, as you said, neurosis or, something to that effect. So yeah, I appreciated that about each individual story.
Oh, thank you.
Well, so let's see. The first story in the collection, titled Jeff Through the Trees, is a dark and compelling urban legend told around multiple campfires multiple times. The story follows a person who ventures into the woods, but the one who returns may not be the same one who entered. Is this an actual urban legend or an adaptation of one? And if so, can you tell us about it?
Oh, well, mimics, there's been quite a lot of talk about people. I've seen it quite a lot on sort of creepy TikTok kind of things where people say that, they've heard the mum call them from downstairs and then they've gone downstairs and there's nobody there. And then the mum comes in 5 minutes later with a shopping and they're like, I swear you called me from downstairs. And so the mimic idea is kind of like a creepy, I don't know if it's just come from creepypastas or whatever, but it is, I've seen it quite a few times lately. And I do like that idea of the mistrust, like the people who you know so well being replaced with something a little bit more sinister, I think is a really fun thing to explore. And I had the idea of just being stuck in a tent with with one of these. Would be horrible because I'm not a huge fan of camping as it is. So to take it to a different level and be there with a relative who isn't necessarily the same relative that I set off on the trip with was just something that I sort of thought about. The title actually came from when me and my husband were driving out of Washington when we went on the trip to USA last year. And he'd got muddled saying, when we were talking about what we were going to do, and instead of the Washington Monument, he accidentally started to call it the Jeff, because he was going to say the Jefferson Memorial, and he stopped himself. So we called that monument Jeff throughout the entire trip. And then as we were driving out, you've got a beautiful view of it just poking up with the trees all around it on either side. And he said, "Oh, look, there's Jeff through the trees." And I was like, "Oh, that's a really good title for a story. Yeah. I am banking that. I will write that when we get home." And so it came from there. It wasn't that I was particularly thinking of doing a story about mimics initially. It was that comment on the holiday that just randomly set off this little spark. And so Jeff became Jeff through the trees, little character.
When you first started talking about it, it made me think of, in line with creepypastas, isn't there a whole kind of subgenre of creepypastas called Glitch in the Matrix?
Yes.
There's a narrator named Derek Weber, I think, who his entire channel is solely committed to those.
Yeah, totally. I mean, they do go into, I've seen things, they are kind of also related to the skinwalker kind of idea as well. So those kind of cultures are very sort of, they would say mimics are something to be seriously concerned about and would have instances of it throughout their history as well. So I think it's one of those things that it's prominent in the background, but in certain areas it is more well known. And yeah, it's just kind of, I think, like certain areas, especially around sort of mountainsides and hillsides in the US, they seem to report them a lot, whether it's something to do with the rocks there or whatever it is, I don't know. But yeah, it seems to be more prevalent in certain areas than others. We don't get many here in Lancashire, I don't think. Yeah.
So I can identify or empathize with you. I'm not a fan of camping either. More of a glamping person.
Yeah, totally.
Gotcha. Well, the story involves a man and his son going camping, which can have a lot of psychological gravity because of the father-son bonding. So do you think the story would have worked as well if it were a different relationship, like two friends or siblings, rather than a father or son?
Well, I think Reed himself, who's the dad, he's just coming to terms with how cruel his father had been. And his own father's passed away quite recently. So he's just trying to come to terms with that. And as the story unfolds, Reed realizes that he's like accidentally kind of put in these same pressures that he experienced with his own father when he was a boy onto this kid. So there's that element of guilt that runs through it that I don't think I would be able to do if it was siblings or cousins or any other kind of relationship. I think that was very important to the story, that he's kind of realizing that his grief is making him sort of manifest these characteristics of his dad, really, and the negative characteristics. And And so the guilt is the last sort of thing. And then it ends with like the coming of age thing where although he's had this experience with this thing that could possibly be the mimic, and he's concerned about whether the son he's brought home is actually his son. And then it sort of talks about him worrying about if he's going to consider his personality changes due to like hormones or difficulties at school or, just normal psychological things that children go through as they're growing up. Is he going to worry about it every single time that comes up? So I think that was something that I was exploring with that, just the pressures of parenthood and not knowing how your child's going to turn out and not knowing if the steps that you've made in these integral parts of bringing them up is going to have caused any of those, I don't want to say malfunctions because that sounds awful, but those kind of personality traits or difficult times that teenagers might go through. So basically, yeah, it's, as we said before, it's just Reed is a big bundle of neuroses in this story, and it's to do with his generational trauma and not wanting to put it onto his son, but accidentally putting it onto his son and then worrying as a result of it, I think. So yeah, he's just a bundle of nerves and worry, bless him. But yeah, with a sort of urban legend at the center of it.
Mm-hmm. So that kind of answers my next question. I was going to ask you, did you intend for the horror to be more external, i.e. monsters, nature, something lurking in the woods, or more internal, which would be like fear, guilt, and trauma? So it sounds like the latter.
Well, I like both. I think like the Jeff story has been really, really popular. A lot of people were really spooked, which is, of course, what you're going to want when you set out writing a horror story. That's the main thing. But I think I just like delving into these characters and just stretching out a little bit of something else and having those contrasts and asking, what is real fear? I think we chatted about it when we were talking about the suffering and how each of the ghosts that latch onto the kids in the story, like prey on each of their own individual terrors and the things that make them who they are. And like if one of the ghosts did one of the things that it was doing to one character to a different character, it wouldn't matter as much. Like the person wouldn't be as scared because it's those personal fears and those personal things that make us who we are that changes how we interpret fear and situations and terror. And yeah, I think that is just always something that I enjoy exploring when I'm building characters, just like what is it that they're actually scared of? And is it necessarily going to be this terrifying monster in front of them, or is it something else? So yeah, I think that's always something that I really like to play with and enjoy reading as well when other people do it. I just find that kind of fun. So
yeah. I guess no matter what genre of horror you're trying to portray, whether it be a slasher or body horror or anything like that, if you delve into the character's psychology and relate it to what they're most afraid of, then that addition of the psychological horror kind of has a synergistic effect where 1 + 1 = 3.
Yeah, agreed. Totally. It just takes it to that different level where it's not just, this is the story, this is what happened to this person. It's, this is why this person is responding in the way that they are. So I think that makes it easier as well if you're the kind of person who doesn't think that way, but you can see it in that character and think, I get why he's doing that now. I wouldn't do that, but I get why they're doing it. And it just kind of draws you in a little bit more, I think. It makes them a little bit more relatable.
Yeah.
Like I say, even if they're completely different to you and how you would act, you can still get drawn into their story and still root for them. And it just gives it that extra layer, I think, like you say.
Yeah. Let me just take a second to welcome our Twitch viewer. Thank you for stopping by. We are talking with MJ Mars. So just kind of a question for you, just almost a non sequitur, but not quite. What do you think is scarier, being lost in the woods alone or being there with someone you don't trust?
That's an interesting one because I am always really creeped out when even if it's broad daylight and I'm in the woods on my own, I get a little spooked anyway. But questions like that always make me think of something that I explored a little bit in my latest book that's coming out in June. And it's that feeling when you know, when you're with a group of friends and you know that there's that wild card and you don't know what they're going to do, and they're just always there. They're always a bit of a liability, and they're always the one having the crazy idea where you go and do this dangerous thing, and you want to do it because it's fun and it's all a part of, you know, growing up and experiencing these things. But there's that bit inside you that's just like, oh, why does he have to do this every freaking time? Like, we are not safe with this person. So yeah, people can get you into some crazy situations that you wouldn't be in if you were on your own. So I don't know. I think as I'm getting a little bit older, I think my survival skills might be a little bit better than they used to be. So I perhaps fare a little better on my own potentially, but I would not like to try it. That's for sure.
Yeah, I don't know about my survival skills as I get older, but definitely my discernment to hopefully not end up with anybody like that.
Yeah.
Well, your next story in Boca al Lupo is about a group of military personnel stationed at a base called Polaris. The world has succumbed to a new ice age, and with it, a predatory creature once confined to the Antarctic now has the perfect conditions to thrive. So, what makes this creature different from classic cold environment monsters like the Thing or the Wendigo?
Well, I think this one is just kind of brute force. So there's not really that much sort of sneaking around.
Yeah.
You know, it's there, it's going. A lot of people have described it like a big marshmallow monster, which I think everybody's always loved ever since Ghostbusters. You know, you can't beat a big
marshmallow.
Yeah. But they're based on, it's actually a myth, a legend from Japan. The ninja are actually real monsters, and they just thrive in the freezing cold waters. There's a few pictures online, and the consensus is that that the polar ice caps have melted into the shape of like a human. So it looks, as it's swimming past boats, like it's a big form, like a humanistic kind of big white giant marshmallow man under the water. But I just always thought they were kind of cool. I like the fact that they're a bit different.
So like you say, I'm sorry to interrupt you. You said
it's okay.
There's an ice formation?
Yeah, it's like they're sort of alleged to be this big giant white, you know, creature that thrives. But the idea is that it's people misidentifying sort of pieces that have fallen off icebergs and that have been whittled down by the water into the shape of a form. So that's the explanation for why a lot of sailors over the years saw these alleged creatures sort of swimming past the boats and, you know, frightening them and making them think that it's this giant humanoid creature that's next to the boat. So there is a cool picture. I'll send it you later.
Actually, I don't know. This may be like a fake or something, but this is pretty...
Oh, wow. I haven't seen that one before. That's cool.
Yeah, it's just the reflection that's kind of forming the mouth. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the one that I'd seen, I think some of these might be...
Some of these look like they're AI generated.
Yeah, unfortunately. But if you go to sort of like any old cryptid pages, there's one, and when you see it, you do think, oh, actually, yeah, that is just eroded ice. But it's like a head and then its arms, but the pits where the arms are all eroded away. So it does just look like a creature kind of swimming through. So it did come from, I'd love to say that I just popped up with that idea out of nowhere, but no, it is an actual like Japanese sort of traditional cryptid. And yeah, it's just, I always enjoyed it. It's like something a little bit different. And I have always pictured them, if they were real, like you say, not like the Thing where there's no kind of sort of insidious, intelligent thing that they're doing behind the scenes. It is just, if there's one near you, it's going to rip you to shreds, and there's not much you can do about it because they're so big and they are coming.
Nice. Well, does it represent something beyond just a physical threat, like nature reclaiming control or the dangers of human hubris?
Well, I kind of liked, and I do touch on it a little bit in the book, that idea of the fencing off. So there is a little, like, necessarily go too political in my work, but I just had to throw in there about the walls, because I wrote it a few years ago, actually, when the walls between America and Mexico were sort of talked about being built. And it's just that thought of initially, well, if you're going to block people out, be careful what you're blocking in, kind of thing. So it is touching on that there was certain people who were safe when this ice age came and certain people who weren't, because of the divides that had been made. So that's a part of it, I think. And then the rest of it is just a bit splatterpunk and a bit crazy and a bit, yeah, I don't think many of my stories have happy endings. That's one that definitely doesn't. So
yeah, definitely. As I said, starts off in the comfort horror realm, but then progresses into the violence synonymous with splatterpunk. So, and the creatures, if I remember correctly, cause about a 50% decrease in America's population, I think it said, or was it the world?
Yeah, especially America, because they'd hatched out in the museum. So they'd been brought back on an ancient ship, and then the climate change had brought the temperature to a certain
the
level.
Goldilocks zone.
Yeah, where they hatched, and then they came out of the museum and chaos ensued. So yeah, it's very unfortunate for the people who were trapped within the wall.
Well, mass extinction's a heavy theme, so were you more interested in exploring human resilience or the fragility of society?
Oh, that is a good question. It's difficult, isn't it? Because I think there again, it goes back to the whole, when the decisions aren't necessarily yours and you're just left struggling with the hand that's been dealt you, kind of thing. So maybe it is more human resilience and having to deal with the things that come up because of other people doing things, like the captain took these eggs to them and then they got sold to the museum. And then, so it's like this knock-on effect of other people's actions, just tiny little moments and little things, little decisions, and then boom, the world has gone to pot. So yeah, I think maybe human resilience is a good one, but yeah, it doesn't really work out for our Team Polaris, does it, unfortunately?
Well, your next story, the Fasten Seatbelt Light is On. Or actually, for those that haven't read the book, let me make quotations just to know where that starts. Quote, "The Fasten Seatbelt Light is On," end quote, is a terrifying tale about a woman named Rhea who conquers her fear of flying only to experience it from an entirely new perspective. Rhea overcomes her fear after meeting a pilot who, upon hearing her concerns, walks her through the step-by-step safety measures that are in place for flying. And it's interesting how flying's often perceived as extremely dangerous, which, I mean, yeah, I understand you're in the sky, but in reality, driving to work in rush hour traffic is statistically far riskier. So did that realization have anything to do with that particular aspect of the story?
Yeah, I've always been terrified of flying, like literally to the point where we'd take off and I would be shaking, crying, like uncontrollably. And I'm not normally a crier, and I really don't like showing emotions or being comforted. I'm not that kind of person. So it is just like the fear just takes over me like nothing else. So I'd still go and I'd still take these trips, but I'd always hate that aspect of it. And then last year, as I say, we went to America for the first time and it just kind of cracked it. Like, I am not afraid of flying anymore. And I think it's the fact that while you're there, you just take flights like buses, really. You know, we were sort of taking so many and you're doing it with such a solid purpose, because I was there to attend the AuthorCon, the Scares That Care. And so I think because it was something that was so focused and so like, right, this is kind of like a business trip, it just switched that mindset of this isn't just a holiday, this is so much more. And yeah, I don't know what it was, but I was just suddenly not afraid anymore. And so I wanted to do that with a character where they've had this huge fear, gotten over it, and become a flight attendant, which actually one of my friend's sisters did in real life, which always used to absolutely fascinate me, because I could never have dreamed of doing that when I was super afraid of it. But no, I kind of get it now. Like, I like it, and I like learning about flying. And there's a little plane that goes having lessons around the field near us. And I've looked up at it a few times and been like, oh, I bet it's really cool to just have a little private flying lesson.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll do that one day. So that is just a complete 180. I would have never, ever, ever have done that before last year. Never, ever, ever in a million years. I was so scared and just so fearful of being out of control. But yeah, it's gone. I mean, I'll find out for AuthorCon in 2 weeks' time whether that's still the case. But
I was just going to say a little recurrency, a little
exactly,
little more training.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I went on my own to Books and Brews in August, and that was definitely something that I would have never have thought in a million years I could do, just fly on my own. So it's like an hour's flight from the UK to Dublin, and then from Dublin on to America. And yeah, just did it. No fear, no crying, no making a fool of myself. So yeah, hopefully that's gone now. But similarly, it was something that happened on the plane on the way back that influenced a part of the story where she sort of sees the purple sun through the tinted windows. And I actually did that when we were flying out of Vegas. And I was like, what the hell is that? What is that in the sky? Why is it purple? And then I was like, oh, it's the tinted windows. It's the sun and it's the tinted windows. I'm such an idiot. But that fear, that like, oh, what is that? Is it alien? I was like, yeah, I've got to do an alien story and include that because it made me laugh at myself.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting how you come up with these stories just from these everyday experiences just coming at you in kind of an odd way.
Yeah, they often are. It could be like something that someone says, like I said, with the depth of the trees, or just something that you see or experience yourself. And then it can just spark something like, oh, I'll put that in something.
Yeah, I've been taking planes since I was a kid because my dad's from Chicago and my mom's from Canada. So visiting family, I'm pretty sure we went every year. We started off in Chicago and then flew to Canada. So I don't know. I think that we were flying as babies at some point. Yeah. So I think I was introduced to it very early on. But one thing that's always freaked me out is flying over an ocean. Now, I've been to Europe. I've been to the UK, been to London, went to Paris. So I noticed they kind of take the coastline up and then they cut over, New England area. So it's not quite so far, but I swear to God, I don't know if I could ever go to Hawaii.
Oh, really?
Oh my God. That is just out in the middle of the ocean for, I don't know how long that flight is, but that's just terrifying to me.
Oh.
So let's see here. Well, do you think fear is more about logic or emotion? And can we ever truly talk ourselves out of fear? Like, it sounds like experience is what kind of dulled the effect for you. Were you ever able to just, like, okay, all of these safety measures are in play. The pilot is experienced, more than likely ex-military, stuff like that. Did that ever work for you?
I mean, it helps, but at the end of the day, it was that moment of takeoff. It was like sensory overload because when the engines kick in and the speed goes, it was like everything's just a little bit too much. And the fact that you completely lost your ability to turn around and walk out. I think there's always that little thing. If you're really afraid of something, you can say, oh, actually, hold up. I don't actually want to do this. And like, leave the airport, just ride off into the sunset. Yeah. But once you're at the point where this plane is hurtling down the runway, there's no going back. It's happening whether you like it or not. And I think that always just it was just too much. And the logic part of it, like I'd read a really good self-help book about flying that was written by a pilot, but it's just in that split second moment, I couldn't apply it. So those kind of measures, they helped in the run up to it, because I used to be just like not being able to get to sleep for weeks in advance, just it would come into my head and I'd get sort of anxiety just thinking about it. And so those kind of measures really did help there. But once you actually sat in that seat and it started rumbling down that track, there was nothing I could do about it, I'm afraid. So the logic definitely helps, but Yeah, it was just like I say, that one point where I couldn't control myself really, which I hate because I am a control freak.
Yeah, I know
And
the feeling.
so the fact that I was like, crying and hyperventilating and upset, and that the people who were sat next to me would have been able to see it, and it was embarrassing, and it was just all of that. So yeah, logic couldn't help me in that moment, I'm afraid. But yeah, I think it was now I can just switch that off and not even think about it and just be like, right, this is happening. We're going. It's fine. Let's do this, which I just wasn't able to do before. So yeah, something just clicked and switched, and now that's fine. Even like this last few months, there's been so many reports of planes in the news, and yeah, it hasn't bothered me the way it would have done in the past. So yeah, something's definitely changed there, thankfully.
Yeah. Well, let's see here. Your next story, Fallen Eagles and Aces, is set in a Western setting where wealthy individuals hire a ragtag group of men and women to guide them to a gold-rich but perilous location, one plagued by deadly creatures known as eagles. So can you tell us about some of the key members of the group? Or I guess every member was kind of a key member. It was pretty small.
Yeah. Yeah, they're just a little bit of a bunch of misfits. They're led by a guy who probably isn't as interesting as some of the others. Like I think that the his sort of second in command, she's really cool. They've got different sort of like sexual identities. Like I saw this thing that said that in Western times there was as much kind of fun and debauchery and as much kind of mixing, different kind of sexualities as there was in the Roman times. Like it was just a bit of a free for all in a lot of occasions. And so I loved this idea of, there's the big burly Throckmorton, and he's got like his little twink who's, who's with them. And then the conversation that the two main characters have where she's sort of describing herself as being asexual. And he's just like, oh no, I really want to crack on. I can't imagine you not feeling anything at all. And she's just like, well, yeah, that's the way it is. And I'm glad of it. I'm out here to do my job. Like it doesn't get in the way of anything. And I like it that way. So I don't know. I never intended it to be that way. It wasn't sort of like, I'm going to write loads of different sexualities in this story, but I don't know. It kind of, as the characters developed, it developed that way. Sometimes I don't have that much control over what they're doing, unfortunately. Sometimes they just seem to write themselves. And the story itself just started with me looking at the question of where does gold come from? Because if you actually have a look online, it's a really shaky kind of explanation. And it's just like, oh, yeah, like outer space or something. I'm sure it was just like a meteor one day and it's fine. It's just like, that's a really, really like ropey kind of answer to how we have all this gold. So I liked that. And I liked the idea that because it's so uncertain, of course, it comes from monsters and it's inside these monsters and they're all full of glitter. And when they get killed, the gold just kind of shoots off into the rocks, and that's where we get gold from. So probably a little bit of a alternative universe, alternative dimension where this is a thing. I like it when questions that are fully scientific, like we know that gold exists. It is just there, it's gold, but where it comes from is a little bit more, no, we're not 100% sure, but it could be this. And I love it when there's things like that are just everyday natural things that are a little bit like under question as to the origins, because then you can just do whatever you like with it. And I'm always going to go with throw a few monsters in there and see what sticks.
Yeah, it's funny how you mention the Old West actually being kind of a sexual free-for-all in a manner of speaking. Like, I mean, when you think about it, unless every Western that I've ever seen is not accurate, or at least, based on a small amount of factual, evidence, the cowboys that herded cattle from, I don't know how many miles those trips were, when they finally got to their destination and got paid, they went directly to the saloon where it was
Yeah.
booze, and then upstairs was a brothel, just drunken
Yeah.
debauchery. So it was like the end goal of making money for these guys was just to cut loose.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's funny. I've met a few guys that work on the oil rigs like that.
Oh, yeah.
They go out 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. They come back. They're just like absolutely insane.
Yeah. And they not bed share together, but it's like when one wakes up and gets out of the bed, the other one gets into the bed. And so it is very like, you've just got this cycle of just being around these same guys for this entire period. And then once you're back, just cut loose and enjoy your time.
Mm-hmm.
Why not?
Why not? Because you can't do anything like that on an oil rig. There's no alcohol. It's like being on a plane. Everything you do out there is compounded legally as far as being against the law and being penalized. So, Well, you mentioned they're kind of misfits. So they're not experienced survivalists. They're just guys and gals that just kind of want to do something crazy.
Rebels.
Yeah. Well, it's set in a classic Wild West era, but you mentioned about being an alternate dimension because obviously there's this strange gold source. Is there more of a backstory to that setting as far as like an alternate history or?
Not yet, but you never know. In the future, there could be. It was just one of those crazy. I'll start off with the premise of them being this vigilante group taking rich people to go to this gold source that's constantly under attack by these monsters that actually produce the gold in the first place. And it just all started from, when I think about gold, I think about panning. And so that's why it became a Wild West thing. It wasn't even supposed to be at first. And I liked the image of the wagons going through the desert with these monsters chasing the wagons and them kind of fighting them off. And yeah, it all just came from that opening scene, really, just thinking about the gold. And then it just branched off into this multi-sexual, a bit crazy, a bit Lehman-esque at the end. I think there's a little bit of a nod to Richard Lehman in how it ends up at the end with the crazy old guy who comes out and sings at them. I thought that was very, very kind of like you'd see him in the woods in a Richard Lehman novel. And so there's a little bit of an homage there to the master. But yeah, it ended up being a little bit of everything. So I never thought I would do a Western. Like, it's never been on my radar to do one. But like I say, it just came from that question about the gold. So you never know. You never say never with these kind of things, because I never thought that I would have done one. But there we go. Maybe I'll elaborate on them in future.
Yeah, I'm sure I'm probably forgetting something or something similar, but I feel like the first time that I've ever read a horror Western of any type, which in this case was a full novel, was probably a few months ago. And I don't know what it is about the minimalism and the isolation of the Old West that goes really good with horror. Because, the Old West was kind of horrific in and of itself without anything supernatural. It was rough. There was all sorts of threats, whether you were out in the rural area or whether you were in some sort of a town. Everybody was armed. There was this constant fear of somebody getting upset. Next thing you know, bullets are flying. So is there anything in particular about the Old West that you think can really be glommed onto and exploited for horror?
Yeah, well, I like you said, that isolation of the journey, I think is really interesting. Like, I don't know if you've read Skinning the Coyote. It was another from one of my Wicked House colleagues, Nick McNulty, and that does that fantastically, because the first half of the book is basically just this journey with these guys. And it all at once feels like, well, not much is happening. There's so much happening because it's just this relationship in this like endless sort of desert setting. And like you say, there's threats everywhere from just the situation that they would find themselves in. And then when they get to somewhere, you don't know who you're meeting up with. You don't know who's like throwing their weight around in the towns. And so, yeah, it's a bit of a crazy idea that things were like that. And it's a bit scary to think about all aspects of it, really.
Yeah. Yeah. Since you mentioned it, shout out to Wicked House Publishing. That, I guarantee you, I've gotten to the point where I know for a fact I could just go to their website and just start going down the line of authors and read their book and not even have to like look at it to be like, oh, is this good? You know, I mean, I just know based on their eye for talent that it's going to be amazing. Like there was one point where I had every author they had on the show, but of course they've since like gotten really big. I've lost track of how many authors they've published these days, but yeah. So shout out to Wicked House. Well, let's see here. Your next story, Spilled Chardonnay, is about a pop punk band that is playing for the viewing of a modern art installation. And the art installation is a configuration of mirrors that are set up to catch the pink light of the blood moon to send a cascade of pink light spiraling to the floor. So the installation itself, a mirrored structure that refracts blood moonlight, sounds visually stunning. I would love to see that myself. Kind of smacks of a little bit of personal experience. Have you seen something like that in the past?
Well, we've got an old priory. It used to be one of the best pubs in town, so it's a terrible shame that it's gone. But that would have like the lights coming through the tinted windows and the colours on the windows and things. I really liked that kind of setting because it was so open inside with the old timber and like the sort of carved bits around the top where it used to be the friary and all the monks would sit and things like that. So I pictured that when I was doing it. But as for the mirrors themselves, I was just thinking about what would make a good portal. And the idea of this blood moon coming in, I think I was listening to, there was a Pearl Jam album out that had Super Blood Wolf Moon as one of the songs.
Okay.
And so I think that kind of influenced it a little bit. And then this pretentious, like the main crux of the story is having a punk band fill in at the last minute at this fancy art installation, scrub up, take the piercings out, take off the fishnets and put on some, slacks and just try and fill this role while still in their heart of hearts, they are this punk band through and through. And so what would be the centerpiece for a big fancy art installation that could have the chance to pull through some portal dwelling gargoyles? Well, that was what it became, this big sea of mirrors. So
yeah. You know what it made me think of? I actually considered proposing to my wife here, but the logistics just didn't work out. But at Rice University in Houston, there is a sky space at sunset somehow, it has something to do with the sun setting in the west, the positioning of this thing. It just...
Oh, that looks amazing.
Yeah. And you can go in here. I don't know if there's any... Is there any internal shots of the inside? This is kind of... I don't know if you can see it. You can go in there. Like there's places to sit up and then places to sit down, just staring up into this sky space.
That looks fantastic.
Yeah. It's pretty cool. Well, let's see. Continuing on with that particular story, this story is interesting because, as you said, it brings to life the actual depiction of demonic monsters known as gargoyles, which oddly enough are commonly found on unusual architectures such as cathedrals and buildings inspired by Gothic Revival and Art Deco styles, and in this case, a monastery. So was the activation of these gargoyles a sort of spiritual retaliation for holding a modern art installation with alcohol and punk music and kind of a materialist celebration in a hallowed space like a monastery?
I love that question, especially since it links with my thinking of the monastery and the friary in Lancaster, that it has been just a pub for for ages until it shut down, unfortunately. Yeah, I mean, it could be. That wasn't the thinking behind it, I don't think. I think the main thing was this, like I say, the contrast between the punks and the uppity kind of person putting on this show, and their guests and them wanting it to be perfect. And so, yeah, it wasn't about the religious aspect, but I can definitely see how that could play into it. And perhaps I should have considered that more while doing it, because that would have been another great little train to run through it, which it didn't even occur to me, I have to say, which is funny considering where it was set. But yeah, maybe I just had that pub in my mind in the first place, and it was already long gone for its original purpose.
Why were gargoyles an artistic thing on especially cathedrals? Like,
there must be something behind it, mustn't there? It must be like maybe they contain the evil so that it doesn't get in or something, or to frighten away the evil. I don't know. It must be something like that, surely.
Let's see. What? Purely? Oh, okay. Well, but why are they gargoyles? Basically, what they do, they act as ornate rain spouts to channel water away from the building's walls, and they're also thought to ward... Oh, there we go. They're also thought to ward off evil spirits and represent the struggle between good and evil. So they're... What's the word I'm looking for? Utilitarian? They're part of like a gutter drainage system, and then spiritually, they are a representation of good and evil and to ward off evil spirits. They're using evil spirits to ward off evil spirits. That's a little odd. Fight fire with fire. I don't know.
Yeah, you'd think they would attract them, if anything. Like,
hey guys, over here. They're cool. We can hang out on the roof. You just got to channel some water. You know, you got to pay rent. Put some work in. Well, there is a lot of lip service paid to the very specific guitar brand Epiphone. And I think we're around the same age, so we probably grew up listening to the same music. You kind of came of age in the 90s. Would that be correct?
Yeah.
So a friend of mine growing up had an Epiphone that looked just like a Les Paul. Can you tell us a little bit about why you included this particular guitar?
Well, this was a bit of in terms of the actual naming of all the instruments, was a bit of a collab between me and Eric Sundquist, who was very keen on the idea of delving deeper and deeper into the instruments. But like, my husband has an Epiphone Dot, the same as Tom DeLonge uses in Blink-182, and like, I've always loved those guitars. There's a bass that I'm kind of interested in, so it was a mixture, really. But I'd say that a lot of the credit for delving deeper into the actual instruments goes to Eric, because I was a little bit reluctant to. I just felt like if I mentioned them too much, I was worried that people would be like, oh, she's, it's a woman and she's just trying to show that she knows what she's talking about, kind of thing. And he was just like, no, don't you worry about that. Let's just go all in. This is a band. Let's do it. Let's put them all in. So it was quite nice. It's nice to kind of voice those concerns about how the reader will take it and bounce it back and have people say, oh, forget about that. Don't you worry about that. We'll do this, because it was a story that appeared in one of Eric's publications with Dark Peninsula. And so that mainly came from that part of the collaboration during editing, where he was just like, yeah, let's just throw the names in, pick your favorite guitars, and we'll go from there. So yeah, it was nice to kind of throw off that concern and just stick them in there and have a bit of a muso celebration.
Yeah, a little fun fact I learned is Epiphone was Gibson's main competitor, so they bought them.
Okay.
Yep. Well, so let's see here. The next story, Big Gulps and Bigfoot, is about two sisters who stumble upon a classic cryptid, but with a horrific spin, just like all the stories. The first thing we encounter is that the two sisters do not get along very well, at least not on a road trip. I don't know how they get along under normal circumstances, but I could feel the anger. I was just like, oh, God, I'm glad I'm not in that car. So why did you want the two main characters to be at each other's throats right off the bat?
I like that kind of thing. I think especially when it's siblings, they bicker and they've been on the road for a few days. There's the little sister who's just a bit more free and easy than the older sister, who's putting in all the hard graft, doing the driving and sort of saying to her, don't get the big gulp because you'll need to pee within 5 minutes of us leaving the last gas station. She's like, no, I won't, no, I won't. And then you just know 10 minutes down the road, we need to stop again because I need to pee. And that was, that was like the opening scene of it, just a normal kind of sisters bickering on this road trip. And yeah, I think that kind of thing makes it more relatable to a lot of people than if they're just like, oh, look at that tree. Oh, check them out. Where are we going to next? I don't get as engaged in stories that are just kind of like harmonious that way. I find that you can sort of plunge right in with a little bit of dissent between your characters a little bit easier. And you get to kind of see their characters a little bit more. I think it was important to me that there was this kind of like more straight-laced sister who is the main character, and then the little sister who's like a little bit of a wild card, but she still loves her at the end of the day. It's just the way siblings are, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess it's kind of a good tactic for a short story where you don't have time to flesh out characters, for very long. So if you put them in the middle of an argument, you can see a lot of what's going on like really quick.
Exactly. Yeah. You can sort of lay out their personality types a little bit quicker than if it's just a conversation about the weather, where you don't get that kind of thing. Whereas in a full-on sibling argument, then you can lay out your cards like quite clearly early on. So yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. Well, government cover-ups are great fodder for a horror story, even more so when the government completely disregards the rights of citizens to conduct an operation for quote, the greater good. So what is the government's role in the cover-up? Is it a shadowy organization, a rogue faction, or something more bureaucratic?
Oh, I like this question because it's not one that I even know for sure myself on this one. Like, who could have devised them? Who could have sent them to deal with these Bigfoot corpses? I think again it was that question of the argument of there can't possibly be Bigfoot because nobody's ever seen a body, and so it just came from this thing where this, like you say, part of a government, whether a little bit of a renegade group, whether sort of sent by the government to constantly get rid of these bodies and anyone who's actually come across one is at the crux of the story. And so even just finding one and declaring it would put you in danger. And you often hear, don't you? It's like the whole thing with the Men in Black and people who say that they reported seeing UFOs and then 3 days later they got a knock at the door, like, don't speak about this to anyone kind of thing. I think that is always really intriguing to people. And the fact that there may be these things going on in the world that are unexplained and they are being covered up, and people who either refuse to comply with the silence treatment or in a position to not sort of share the information just get removed and the problem is gone by the powers that be. So yeah, where this organization actually are getting their instructions from, I would have to consider it a little further, but they're not very good at what they do. At the end of the day, they're a bit rubbish. So
yeah, they I was thinking like a rogue faction of the CIA, doing one of those MK Ultra type operations. Yeah. Well, the sad part of the story, which one of the sisters laments, is that it all could have been avoided. And that soul-crushing element is present in many of my favorite horror films like Irreversible and similar works. So Did you intend for the reader to feel sympathy for both sisters, or to feel like one is more responsible for what happens?
I think there's always that thing, like going back to the siblings arguing and about how, like, if they hadn't have stopped at this gas station, if they hadn't have got this big gulp, if they'd have just carried on through, then they wouldn't have been put in that situation in the first place. I suppose that is a theme in a lot of the stories, like we were talking about before with the In Bocca al Lupo, just other people's impact on the decisions that you make and the things that you have to do. And so, yeah, it's always kind of sad, isn't it, when you hear a story about, oh, if only they hadn't have been there. And there is that little regret and that, oh God, what would it look like if they'd just done something slightly different? And again, who do you blame? It's like when you see true life things where, a friend or, a parent who's taken their kids somewhere they didn't 100% want to go, and then something bad happens and you just think, oh, if they could have just stayed, in the bedroom playing PlayStation instead of being taken out on that hike, then it would have never have happened. But I mean, hindsight is a wonderful thing, but I do find that quite a scary factor of life, that you just, you could be walking down the street one day, decide to go to the shop at a certain time, and a slate could fall off a roof and hit you on the head, and then that's it. And it's just that split second where you could have made the decision to go at any time or to not go or to go the other way, and it wouldn't have happened. And yeah, I think that's always kind of scary, just the what if.
Well, the next story, Stooge, is my favorite story in the collection.
Yes.
And you mentioned that it was yours as well. Is that correct?
Yeah. I love Stooge, and I always say whenever anyone mentions it, because it's never one that people usually bring up as being one of their favorites. And because it was the one I really struggled with, and so it had a lot of moving parts, but it ended up meaning a lot to me. Like, I don't know, it's hard to explain. I think because it was the one that I just couldn't reconcile for ages, I've got that little bit of extra protective air over it. And when the first few reviews came in and they were mentioning like Jeff and the seatbelt lights on and things, and nobody ever, ever, ever mentioned Stooge. And I was just like, oh, is he the little runt of the litter? Is nobody going to like him? But like, I love Stooge. Yeah. I thought it was so fun and so creepy, and like just the whole magician lore, I think it really does fit in well with the horror lore. So I loved doing it. It was a lot of fun, and quite difficult to get it to where I felt like it was right. So yeah, it does mean a lot to me. So I'm so happy you said that.
Yeah, well, for the listeners that haven't read the story, it follows a man from a long line of magicians whose great-grandfather allegedly triggered a curse on their bloodline. And in magic, a stooge is a planted audience member who pretends to be an unsuspecting spectator while secretly assisting the magician. So I was curious, have you ever watched a magician live and suspected them of actually using a stooge? Because I have a family member. You know who David Copperfield is, right? She, I think, saw him in Vegas, I believe, and she got called up on the stage, and he asked her to pick a color or a number or something random like that, and then he switched his mic off and told her what to pick. And like,
that is so sad, isn't it?
Yeah, and I mean, I can only imagine the pressure, like you are in front of this huge crowd, famous magician. What are you going to do? You're not going to throw a wrench into the works, but at the same time, she was like so resentful towards him because she was basically turned into a stooge against her will. So
that's awful. And it's quite funny you mentioned that, because when we were in Vegas, I actually got to go up on stage with Penn and Teller. And I was going to say, like, Penn and Teller have always been my favorites because they do call out the BS, and they do say
they had a show called Bullshit.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And they're like, of course it's fake. This is how we do it. But I mean, they are still so amazing. And even though they're there just saying to you, this is a show, this is fake, you're like, but how did you just do that? That's it's still incredible. And So I got called up to do where they do this one that they have all the audience guess how many jelly beans are in a jar. And then they call someone up on stage to grab however many handfuls of money you want out of a pot and to count up the coins. And it ended up that the coins that I had was the same as the average of the people who they brought up on stage to guess how many jelly beans there were. So it was incredible seeing that from that perspective. I suspect, because it took me so bloody long to count these coins, I am dreadful at maths, and maths under pressure, like you say, when there's an auditorium full of people just staring at you.
No way.
And the pen as well is just huge. I mean, I love him to pieces, but he's so big, and I'm just like 5'2".
Yeah, isn't he like 6'3" or 6'5", something like that?
Yeah. And he's like a really big guy as well. But he wasn't like I didn't feel intimidated. He's got such a lovely kind of energy about him. So sort of once I'd calmed down and managed to put these coins into the right piles and count them up, so I wrote the amount on like a big piece of card, and I think that the number that I wrote was fed to them through the table, because there was a lot of wires and things under the table, and he was like, don't trip on those. But there was nothing, like if I'd have gone up there and I'd have been told to do something, it would have been horrible. I'd have absolutely hated that, because that was just one of the best experiences of my entire life. I loved it. And I got to keep the jelly beans at the end, so I've still got those upstairs.
Yeah.
My husband's always like, can I just have some jelly beans? I'm like, nope, they're my Penn and Teller jelly beans. You are not touching those. They are staying forever.
They're going to turn to dust.
Exactly. Yeah, they're just going to be, I mean, if jelly beans go moldy, I'll be the one to find out, because they will still be there in 40 years, and I will see. But to be told this is what you should say is just horrible, absolutely horrible. Yeah, for your relative. I feel so bad for them.
Well,
because it should be.
There's no skill involved. Like a lot of people say, well, if you know how the trick's done, it takes the magic out of it. Well, that's true to an extent, I suppose. But when I see Penn and Teller actually do the tricks, like they reveal how they're done, like I saw a video of them doing one where everything was opaque, and then one where everything was clear, like transparent.
Oh, yes.
So you could see what they were doing. And I mean, okay, so
and you're still like,
it's like,
what?
Yeah, it's like, okay, the magic is gone, so to speak, but it's like, wow, what skill do you have to pull that off? Like, you make one little mistake. Oh, I see what he's doing. The trick's ruined. Like, you have got to be on point. Yeah.
They are brilliant. Just absolutely brilliant. And like you say, there's still that magic in even knowing how they're doing it, because what they're doing is just so beautifully done. I just think they're absolutely fantastic, and they hate Copperfield. So like I listened to.
Well, so Penn's does my sister-in-law.
Yeah, Penn's got this podcast called Penn Sunday School, and there's so many stories that he just launches into, where he's just like, "Oh, Copperfield, we went and did this," and they're always doing things to them because they just couldn't stand him. So there you go.
Well, circling back to the story, I love the dynamic of traditional stage magic intersecting with real satanic magic. So what do you think makes the intersection of stage magic and real magic so compelling in fiction? Like, I kind of think of it as like, it's just a trick, but man, it's so crazy. How are they actually doing it? That little thing in the back of your mind, well, maybe they did make a deal with the devil. Who knows?
I always like to put my mind into what it must have been like for Victorians experiencing it, and when it was sort of having its heyday, and there was that mixture of magic and the occult kind of joining together, and like Houdini was interested in how it all worked in terms of the occult, as well as having the tricks that obviously he was just devising and coming up with himself. And so I think the two work together so well, because it is having that stage presence, creating all these amazing things for your audience, and doing it in such a sneaky way that develops into skill over the years and becomes this incredible experience of, oh my God, I saw this happen. There must be ghosts, because how else would this woman have had ectoplasm coming out of her mouth at this seance, you know? And I mean, they didn't have the internet. They didn't have reference books that could just say, oh, you know, this is how they did it. It's just a trick. You know, it must have all just felt so real and with no explanation at all. So I think that must have just been absolutely mind-blowing to have that. And the idea of someone wielding that power, I thought, kind of inspired me with the great-grandfather and how he took that as his persona of, you know, whatever it takes to get what he wants, he will do it. And yeah, it's quite a creepy feeling for a character in those times to have that power over people. So I enjoy playing with that.
Yeah, you talk about Victorian times, and there was quite an intersection with the occult and science. I mean, you know, you've got astrology going to astronomy, alchemy going to chemistry, numerology going to mathematics, you know, and the Queen actually had a court magician. You ever heard of John Dee?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
He, I guess, basically was under the employ of the Queen to be her court magician, I guess, to help her with, you know, predicting the future and stuff like that. But I think his main reason for wanting to be there and do that is so he had the time and resources to study science, basically. He was more of a scientist than, I mean, he was an occultist, but he was more like to the type of science that was, you know, like you imagine technology now to them would be just black magic. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. Unfathomable. Yeah.
Well, this story explores the demoralizing reality of performing as a small-time magician, where audiences often refuse to suspend disbelief and instead heckle the magician, whether out of drunkenness, cynicism, or both. The story touches on the loneliness of performers. So was that an intentional theme?
Yeah, I think it's a really tough business to be in, a really tough game, and you have to have such thick skin. And the way he's just persevering, even though his mum's pretty much disowned him for doing it. Like, it started at the front where he's miserable because he's doing this profession, but it's his heart. Like, it's what he wants to do. It's all he's ever wanted to do. And as that develops in the story, maybe it isn't just his personal vocation that's driving him in that direction. But I do think that there's so many professions out there where people are just driven to do it for the love of it. And they do end up exposed to these, you know, horrible living situations and performing to people who aren't interested, all in the hope that they will be within that 2% who manage to make it big and, you know, see the bright lights and have it be a good and lucrative profession. But it's a tough act. And I think reading about any magician, it's hearing about that doggedness that you have to have and just everything aligning in the right place for them to make it successful. I think it's really interesting that people can put themselves through that, because I don't think for anyone it ever happened overnight. So yeah, I find all that really interesting. And like I mentioned in there about how some of it came from someone who was in prison. And I hear that a lot of times that is the start for a lot of people who do get into magic, because you sat there with a deck of cards, you don't have anything to do, and you learn some tricks. And then that's how he ended up making his money and starting off on his way down a dark path. But that's how he got into it in the first place. So yeah, I love like hearing about magicians. I think they always have an interesting tale to tell.
Yeah, when I used to play poker, there was a guy, he was a regular, he was a professional magician, like he did, you know, corporate parties and stuff like that. But he would sit down with his own deck of cards and just start doing all these crazy flourishes. And I was like, dude, you are not dealing. you will not touch the cards on this table, my friend.
For sure.
Well, so do you see parallels between small time magicians and other struggling artists?
Oh, yeah, yeah. Like, I think for anything, when it's something like that, that is about skill with an extra layer of kind of keeping cool under pressure. I mean, being a writer, it's really hard to put yourself out there with your little book babies. But when you're a magician, the amount of skill that it takes to get out in front of an audience and do all these things without the nerves getting to
You're
you, I
so
think is really
exposed.
admirable.
Yeah.
Exactly. And if you drop something, if you drop the card that you've, palmed or whatever, it's game over and you're a joke and everyone can see it. And it's such a feeling like similar to artists at the first exhibition. If everyone was walking around going, oh, that's shit, don't like that one. You're putting yourself out there and you're getting this abuse back. And it's brave, and there's nobody who's your boss saying, right, do it this way. I mean, maybe with magicians when they get to be on a stage and get then you do have a boss saying, right, do it this way. But to get to that point, yeah, there's a lot of exposure and a lot of risk of people just dragging you down and heckling and being nasty, and you've just got to take it and know that what you're doing is the right thing for you. So yeah, definitely parallels with a lot of vocations, I would think.
Well, the final story, the collection's namesake, We've Already Gone Too Far, is pure psychological horror. And to me, it feels like a blend of Flatliners and Project MK Ultra, like I spoke about earlier. So, would you be more frightened if there was nothing after death or something after death?
I can remember I said this to my mum once. I was just like, oh, I really hope that it's just black, like when you die, there's just nothing. And she was horrified. She was like, how could you say that? Don't you want like a cuddle off your nana and to see all these relatives? I was just like, kind of, but
I mean, even when you have a good life, it's still a pain in the ass,
Yeah. I was like, it just makes me feel so tired. Yeah. There's like something else afterwards. And I mean, what would be the point? I mean, I know that sounds really like bleak and a bit, I don't know, a bit nihilistic really, but it's just like, I don't know. It makes more sense to me that it is just like you've gone to sleep and that is it. Done. I mean, I know all the theories about energy and how like energy can't be destroyed. So you parts of you are still out there, and that is brilliant, and I love it. But yes, as for the whole afterlife and everybody just being up there, I don't know. It just, there's something about it that, like I say, just makes me feel kind of tired. Which I don't know if that just makes me sound awful, but yeah, I'd kind of prefer it to just be. That's it, I think. I can't imagine, like, oh my God, the worst things when people say, have you heard that theory where, like, everybody picks their, like, when you're about to come down into a body, you can pick the family that you go into. This is a theory. This is just something that's out there.
Well, and then so, like, some people have made some bad decisions.
Exactly. You just think, what? Why would anyone have done this? But it's all about like, so I think the theory is that your purpose, your sort of spiritual purpose, is to grow. And so every path that you pick is like a different lesson. So you'd pick like a terrible kind of upbringing to fill in that life lesson and blah, blah, blah. And then you'd die and you'd go back up and then you'd come back down and maybe have a different kind of path. And
that's, well, I don't know if it's the exact same thing, but it's kind of like Nietzsche's concept of eternal recurrence. You keep on experiencing the same life over and over until you get it right, which I hope is not true.
It's tedious. It's just like, I can't with that. It just frightens me so much. Like, have you seen that Disney movie Soul? Oh my God, it scared the shit out of me. I'm not even lying. I don't get scared by horror movies, but we had to turn that off. It freaked me out. And it was that same principle of like, people just having these choices and going back into and getting this new soul every time. And I hated it. I think I have just like a deep-seated fear of that concept. I did not like it at all. So even this Disney movie just scared the crap out of me. Yeah. And nothing scares me. So apart from aeroplanes. But yeah, I don't like that one at all. So yeah, probably, hopefully, endless sleep. But I guess there's only one way to find out.
Yeah, I mean, there's a certain amount of apprehension about like ceasing to be. But like one of my favorite quotes about death is from Epicurus. Death is nothing to us, since when we are, death has not come. And when death has come, we are not.
Brilliant. That's great. Yeah, I mean, I think with death, I think it's that whole fear of missing out, isn't it? It's like, I mean, I can remember when, this sounds really stupid, but like when the Marvel movies were huge. I mean, I've always loved Marvel. I've always got like Uncanny X-Men and comics and things like that. But when Endgame was about to come, and I can remember just thinking one day, oh God, wouldn't it be awful if I died before I got to the Endgame? Like, it was such a stupid thought. But it's that a fear of missing something big in your life, isn't it? And then, so yeah, I think those are the main things that bother me about death, just missing something big.
Yeah, I don't want to end up like in some state of suffering, like, like I want it to just be like, I just recently had surgery, listeners at home, and the way that you go under anesthesia to me is just
terrifying.
No, I'm saying that's how I hope death is. It's just you're there for a second and then the lights are out,
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah.
There's I mean, they're like, up until I think this last point, there was some apprehension. I don't know. It's weird how I've had surgery multiple times and there's always apprehension, but then the same thing always happens. You scoot over onto the operating table. They put a mask over you and just tell you to count backwards from 10. And then the next thing you know, you've woken up,
Oh, I suppose again, it's that thing of having the trust in the person. Like you have the trust in the pilot, you've got to have the trust in the surgeons and the anaesthetists that you're in safe hands.
I'm not, and I'm not even talking about like, whether they're competent or not. I'm just talking about the actual act of consciousness ceasing to be. Like the apprehension beforehand is horrible, but when it actually happens, it's just like, So I just imagine if death was like going under anesthesia and just not waking up, then it doesn't sound that bad. So anyway, well, I should have clarified this with you beforehand, but would you like to read a passage from the book?
I could do if you want. Is there a particular one that you would recommend?
Well, like I'm obviously biased to the Stooge, but what I've been doing is putting a music bed when people read. So I guess whatever you think in the book would sound really good, with some dark music underneath it that has that kind of cadence. Maybe the Stooge would be that. I don't know.
Okie dokie. How much do you want it to be? Just like a couple of pages?
As much as you like. Makes no difference to me.
Okie dokie. Compared to the downtown hovel of the Gentlemen's Club Evan performed in each night, the funeral parlour smelled like a dream. Although the formaldehyde stench of chemicals mixed with drain water was wafting under a nearby door, made even more noticeable by the lack of mourners attending, the church-like coziness of dusty pews and the springtime pollen of the few drooping bunches of flowers near the coffin gave the room a sense of occasion. The occasion was Evan's mother's funeral. He'd hopped straight on a plane from his last show, still wearing his magician's suit, as it was the only thing he owned that was remotely appropriate. The suit was a dark pinstripe grey, size slightly too large to conceal his trips in hidden pouches within the lining, and the right flap gaped open on his thigh, revealing creamy satin. A dark blood stain had dried to a crusted brown. Evan winced and straightened the jacket, covering the mark. He glanced around the room, hoping nobody had seen the dubious-looking stain, but there was barely anybody in the room at all, let alone anyone close enough to spy a blood stain on a hapless magician's inner jacket lining. It wasn't what it looked like. That is, it was blood, but it wasn't human. Evan's magic show was built on the macabre, as was his family tradition. His cup and balls routine began with sheep eyes and grew to a grotesque finale where he slapped a blood-soaked bull's heart on the table. In his opinion, it beat the hell out of Paul Daniels' Orange. But the punters at Fat Frank's Fiddles and Fries were usually too wasted to offer any appreciation. Of the latest heckles, a demand to eat the fucking heart, you pointless fuck, haunted him each night as he prepared to step on the sticky, threadbare carpet of the stage. While the sheep eyes he used in his routine were glass replicas that had been passed down in his grandfather's trick box, and the animal skulls that increased in size as the trick progressed didn't leave any residue, he honoured his father's wish to continue the tradition of a truly show-stopping finale. Because of this, he ordered a real bull's heart from the butcher's 2 days before every show. He'd spent more on that damn trick than he'd earned in his life, but to him it was worth it. The rare occasions when someone in the audience gasped or gagged at the horrific reveal of a shining and blooded bull's heart was worth losing everything for. Is that okay? Or what do you think? Oh, sorry.
There we go. I should have had that queued up better.
No, it's just me. I'm always just like,
that was good. I was just trying to get some clapping for you. It's a little tedious process over here. I don't have my normal interface, so.
Oh, thank you.
Absolutely. Well, MJ, it has been a pleasure talking with you.
You too, as always. It's like I say, it's really nice to have someone who delves so deep into the stories, and the questions that you ask are always so bob on with like interest and insightfulness. So I really appreciate it. It's always a joy.
Love your work.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Well, so as we bring the show to a close, is there anything you'd like to plug, reiterate, or let your readers know about?
Well, I mentioned briefly before, I've got a book coming out with Wicked House in June. It's called The Phobia Experiments. I'm really excited for that one. It's my second novel, and it's about demons coming through people's eyes. So that should be a lot of fun. I've also got Try Not to Die in the UK coming out hopefully in April. So we've just been working on the finishing touches of that. So it starts at Loch Ness and you journey down through England all the way down to Tintagel with King Arthur, and it ends with the Knights of the Round Table. So if you enjoy sort of choose your own adventure style books, and you've read any of the Try Not to Die series, you'll know it's kind of like an adult horror version of that. So that's really a lot of fun. That's coming out soon. But you can find out more at mjmarsauthor.com. So you can sign up to my newsletter there. Just come and have a read of what's going on and say hi. I'm always happy to have people say hi.
Awesome. Well, we all look forward to that. So, listeners at home, both live and on demand, all links are in the description. And MJ, thank you again for joining me.
Thank you, Vince. Take care.
And thank you to everyone who tuned in. If you enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Be sure to tune in next Tuesday for a new episode featuring the best and brightest authors and filmmakers of dark literature and film. So until then, stay healthy, stay sane, and as always, thank you for listening. See you next time.